Hello, this is David. Welcome to a video review for Gunter Meissner's Correlation Risk Modeling and Management. This is one of our favorite books in the FRM and one of our favorite authors who we've had the opportunity to interact with over the years. We start with his chapter 1, which is called Some Correlation Basics. And with respect to this first chapter 1, the chapter is not very long, but we do have several learning objectives. And you can see here that includes we want to be able to describe financial correlation risk. What do we mean by correlation risk? How did correlation contribute to the global financial crisis? So there is a specific case study in here that we want to take a look at with respect to a CDO and bonds on Ford and GM. We want to be able to describe the structure, uses, and payoffs of correlation swap, estimate the impact of different correlations between assets in the trading book on the VaR capital charge, explain the role of correlation risk in market and credit risk, and finally relate correlation risk to systematic and concentration risk. So we have quite a few slides to look at in this presentation. We start by describing financial correlation risk and the areas in which it appears in finance. So here's our basic definition. Financial correlation risk is the risk of financial loss due to adverse movements in correlation between two or more financial variables. And so the example that Meissner uses here is and this is our re-rendering of the same diagram, classic credit default swap. To illustrate here wrong way risk. And wrong way risk is a manifestation of adverse correlation. So that's why it's showing up here. The point is correlation, but we have an instance here of wrong way risk. And here's that classic credit default swap we have here in the green box, what is called the investor, or probably more commonly, the protection buyer. They are long the CDS and synthetically short the reference. So this is the CDS buyer who is buying credit protection by paying the CDS spread. That's the denoted with S, or the premium, which is analogous to premium payments on an insurance policy. It's not insurance, but that's the analogy. And so these payments are being made to in this case, the CDS seller, who is the protection seller. And these payments are made in exchange for a contingent payout. That is a payout if there is a default or more generally a credit trigger on the reference asset. So that this payout may or not be made. And we have here a reference asset. And so okay, that's the classic story, but wrong way risk specifically is adverse correlation between the bond issuer, so that's the reference asset here, and the bond, what Meissner's called the insurer, or the CDS seller or protection seller. So specifically here, when we first look at CDS, credit default swaps, we tend to ignore or assume there's no relationship here. But wrong way risk is the adverse correlation between the credit quality of these two entities. So what would that look like? Well, specifically, that would look like if the reference, a correlation between the reference asset, if its credit quality deteriorates, is correlated with a deterioration in the credit quality of the counterparty. So if you think about that, that'd be very significant to you as a CDS buyer. In a worst case scenario, if this reference asset really deteriorates to the point where it is likely to default, at that moment, you don't want your counterparty's credit quality to also be deteriorating. So that adverse correlation here would be an instance of wrong way risk. Correlation risk is critical in risk management, and in general, an increase in asset return correlations increase the risk of financial loss, is often measured by value at risk. So we'll see the formula in a few slides forward, but we know this generally with the portfolio VaR calculation, that classic formula for portfolio volatility, which scales to portfolio value at risk. In general, an increase in correlation increases the volatility and therefore the VAR. So it's critical in risk management, but it includes non-financial variables like economic or political events, sovereign debt and currency value, geopolitical tensions, correlated markets, and economies.